Welcome to this learning segment on implementation progress monitoring. I'm Pat Reeves, Hill Project Director, and I will be joined as we go through this segment together by two of our Hill facilitators, Marie DeGroot and Teresa McDougall. They will assist me with examples from the schools that they are working with. We have a spotty history when it comes to full implementation of evidence-based change initiative in schools. Why is that? There are many reasons that we have found in the research to explain that weak history of implementation, and they include such things as deeply entrenched habits and systems that don't support the change, too many change initiatives going on at the same time, lack of clarity about what full implementation looks like, and so on. Many of these you probably have experienced. The Hill model for school renewal is designed to address each of these and other detractors from implementation success. Strategies for implementation success are built into each phase of the Hill school renewal process. During phase 1, schools develop their vision of success in a particular focus area to support their school mission and vision, including their vision for student equity and success. Then they begin to take stock of the strengths they have developed to achieve that vision of success. During phase 2, school teams delve deeply into student and school data to determine actionable student growth targets to eliminate achievement gaps and move all students toward success. In phase 3, the school builds gold standard implementation guides around evidence-based practices to achieve their student growth targets. These guides identify the actual behaviors that teachers, principals, and others will use to achieve those growth targets for students. Phase 4 is where the rubber meets the road. It is where school teams take collective ownership to achieve full implementation of their evidence-based change practices and achieve their vision for equity and for student success. We'll pause here and give you a minute to have a team conversation. We hope that you can enjoy the time to pause and reflect. Use this conversation to talk about what you've learned about your school's current state and your opportunities for growth. Review how you establish priority growth targets and how you will carry out collective ownership for achieving those growth targets. Here are some questions to guide you as you have this review and this conversation. This slide presents a graphic, and the graphic shows a full cycle of the Hill School renewal process. Notice how we start within that big circle by identifying strengths for students, classroom practice, and leadership and support. Then we delve deeply into our student and school data to identify actionable growth targets. We decide which of those growth targets should be a priority for the current renewal cycle. Then we identify evidence-based practices that will achieve the growth we are seeking for students in that cycle. To complete phase 3, we unpack those evidence-based practices and identify specific teacher, principal, and classroom support behaviors that will help achieve full implementation. This results in a fully aligned renewal plan with the power to dramatically change student outcomes in a very targeted priority area. The way we work through the phases of school renewal sets Hill and the Hill process apart from other improvement and change processes. While school teams work through the phases of school renewal, those teams are building the motivation and the capacity to achieve implementation success. They are using appreciative strengths-based practices to build up the positive core of the school. They are making evidence-based decisions at a deeper and more actionable level. They're building collective ownership within a safe and supportive culture. And they're creating systems alignment to support student and adult learning and growth. Building these practices into the way the school approaches positive change is a key to becoming an equity-based school that can continue to engage in cycles of renewal to achieve a desired state. Back to the graphic of the phases and the alignment of the activities within that phase. This oval in red shows phase 4, where we build the implementation monitoring plan. These plans identify the measures, the benchmarks, and the data processes that we will use to track implementation progress in real time. We can think about the phase 4 implementation monitoring plan as similar to conducting continuous progress toward a desired state of our health. We can monitor our way towards achieving a weight, a strength, or any other health goal by setting growth targets and using evidence-based practices that will get us there. Those practices could include such things as daily walking, using pieces of exercise equipment in an exercise routine. We can also include practices of diet management, sleep management, and so on. The phase 4 implementation monitoring plan is like our fitness monitoring device. The phase 4 implementation monitoring plan offers the same opportunity to track progress in real time as that fitness watch that you wear or your iPhone watch that includes all those fitness monitoring processes. It sets measures. It allows you to set progress benchmarks. And it allows you to identify your data processes for monitoring both your growth and your goal, your progress towards your goal. For the implementation monitoring plan, works the same way. It allows us to set those measures, benchmarks, and processes for monitoring both student growth and positive changes in the adult behaviors that will lead to that growth. The monitoring plan is where we take school improvement goals down to size by biting off segments of change that we can achieve over short cycles of renewal. By tracking a few actionable priority growth targets in each cycle, the school can build a progressive set of steps, moving steadily towards a desired state. We have learned to do this with health goals because tracking increments of change is more motivating and actionable and achievable. It may take a few renewal cycles to achieve a larger goal, but identifying the most critical growth edges for each cycle will accelerate the rate of positive change and sustain the effort to achieve the ultimate goal. Again, let's pause and give you some time to reflect. Here are some questions that can help you have a good conversation. Have you drilled down into student data sufficiently to find and prioritize actionable student growth targets? Have we identified one or more evidence-based practices to achieve those growth targets? Have we developed gold standard implementation guides that include specific classroom, leadership, and support behaviors to achieve full implementation of those evidence-based classroom practices? Now that you've had that conversation, I'm going to share with you a video clip created by Teresa McDougall, talking about how teachers in one of the schools she works with are using a process that they have used in the past called the SMART goal process to conduct that monitoring in real time with their own classroom generated data.
So this is where the teachers start to develop their plan. So who are the students? Who's the teacher? And they start to fill this out. This is a real collaborative effort because they really want to have conversation around, so how are you going to move those students from partially proficient to proficient in this area? What area did you choose? Do you have enough data? Do I have enough data? What are you using for that? And so it really becomes a collective problem solving and solution gathering opportunities. And looking at what evidence we use to monitor student progress is really, really important. What real-time and ongoing data? Essential number 9, which is the use of ongoing and observable data, really gives teachers to have permission to use conversation, to use that reader behavior checklist. That's where you go back to what are the other data sources you're collecting and help teachers identify all of the opportunities that they can use to monitor student progress.
The implementation monitoring plan has 2 parts. Part 1 focuses on setting progress benchmarks for student priority growth targets and tracking progress with real-time measures that are sensitive enough to show small increments of growth. Formative classroom assessments are critical complements to benchmark assessments for this part of the monitoring plan. Part 2 is the plan to monitor implementation of gold standard teacher behaviors for evidence-based practice targets. Part 2 is also where we track the leadership and support behaviors of principals and others who share collective ownership for the change. Here's an example of Part 1. In this example, the student priority growth target is focusing on students reading with good use of predicting, phrasing, and chunking strategies that help create fluency and also help lead to comprehension. The measures they're going to be using are miscue analysis, a rubric they've created for phrasing and chunking, checking on new vocabulary they've introduced in their read alouds, and short checks on intra and intertext comprehension. In this slide, we look at the beginning of Part 2 of the monitoring plan. It starts with identifying the classroom practices and behaviors that can be observed in real time. The measures to follow the implementation of those classroom practices are very supportive and used to support and confirm and celebrate teacher progress and teacher growth. Those measures are also formative, and the data is used to support teachers, not judge them. Here's another
keeping the focus and sharing the vision. So a strategy that has evolved over time. We've started actually mapping out our year on a whiteboard so that everybody sees the plan. And in fact, on the same whiteboard, it has developed in our last March staff meeting after some new learning. The staff in grade level teams identified what their implementation plan was and what the evidence of that work would look like. So they start filling out this plan. So no longer does the principal have to own this, or even just the teacher leadership team. Collectively, all of the teachers are identifying their next steps. And you'll notice on the anchor chart, at the beginning of the year, when we identify our growth edges, our classroom practice growth edges, create a systematic way for teachers to use and analyze student data to make ongoing instructional decisions for core and flexible groupings. We put these charts around the library, and we do a carousel, and teams walk around, and together they discuss what is their existing state. And then using research evidence-based practices such as the essential literacy practices, they look at the desired state. So what does research say that we should be doing in this area? And that comes with us to every staff meeting, or it's in the background, so that teachers are constantly reminded of the why. This is our goal. This is why we're doing this work, is to achieve success in this area. And then we always have an anchor chart. This is what our data dialogue notes are going to look like. And quite honestly, that has evolved over time. And it's so exciting to see how these leadership teams are really taking it to that next level. So where to begin? Create a space for the data dialogue. You need to make sure that there's space and tables is set up for that collaborative conversation. Provide a data wall for teachers to organize their students. I have tried this with many staff, either having it digitally or in a file folder, but success comes when it's made visual, when it's made public. So those data walls on a whiteboard that's movable is so valuable. For over 15, 20 years, I've been doing this with staff, and it's the data wall that builds that collective ownership. Provide common data reports for each teacher to focus on one subject at a time. When they get really comfortable and have built that capacity around, say, reading, then move on and add math. And you will know when teachers are ready to add another subject area. And have the highlighters, chart markers, and sticky notes, et cetera, available.
I hope that in hearing this clip, you noticed how many ways that the school was putting to work the ideas of the positive core, collective ownership, evidence-based decisions, and organizational learning. So pause and reflect at this time. How are you doing that? How are you using the Hill principles and practices to cultivate a mutually supportive process for implementation progress monitoring in your school? Going back to the part 2 of the monitoring plan, we see that the monitoring plan also focuses on the adult behaviors that the principal will use to lead and support the work. Behaviors like creating a schedule for walkthroughs and observations. And the measures are very easy to put in place because they're just artifacts and logs of the activities that the principal is committing to. Going further in part 2 and to look further at areas of support for change in the classroom, we can build in actions for the literacy coach, as you see here. We can build in actions that support the work of classroom change, also by others in the school and by the leadership team. So you see examples of some leadership team monitoring here, and also examples of monitoring the support behaviors of others like parapros, the media center personnel, even district office personnel and ISD people who might be supporting that work. Now we're going to take a look at a clip that shows some conversation from a school that was supported by facilitator Marie de Groot.
The next series of slides, you'll see two people here, the principal from Newaygo Elementary, Mrs. Candy Wells, and Mrs. Melissa Reha, literacy coach. You'll see a short clip, and as you watch this, and as they talk about phase 4 of the Hill School renewal process, think about the connections that you might be able to make with the Hill principles. Those again are listed to the right: the positive core, evidence-based decision-making, collective ownership, and organizational learning. What are the strengths and celebrations of Newaygo's work creating the gold standard implementation guide and also developing a monitoring plan for that work?
Well, I'll speak to the celebration. I think that one of our biggest celebrations of this work is to have those gold standard implementation guides. And it was a tricky process getting there. We worked a lot together as a team. We hashed a lot of things out. We constantly went back to the essentials. But just having everyone talk about what does that look like? What does that look like in a first grade classroom? What does that look like in a third grade classroom? And take those things back to grade level teams. So as we came together as a Hill team, we could really determine where we were at and where we wanted to go. This work was very specific to our building and our journey. It helped us determine what resources we needed, what planning we needed, how we could support teachers. And that was the hard work of this process, to sit together and really hash it out. What does it mean? What does it look like? What does it sound like in our classroom? So to end up with this document that we could present to staff in terms of, this is what interactive read aloud looks like at Newaygo Elementary, that was a huge celebration.
I think another thing that we were able to use the gold standard document for is to do some evidence-based decision-making. So once we developed that gold standard document, then we were able to go in and observe people doing read alouds and collect some data. Then we looked at areas that we needed to come back and revisit with teachers as far as giving them some support to be successful with read alouds and bring it up to that gold standard level. And then we could monitor. So we did several monitoring cycles. And so it wasn't just, here's the gold standard document, here's the document, let's support you so that you feel 100% comfortable with that portion of your day with your 10 essentials.
All of those works really led, all of those voices really led to our collective ownership. Like, this truly was a team effort, and we involved all sorts of people. So that's one thing I would suggest. The other thing that I would suggest is, although it's tempting, don't shortcut this process. That renewal process that you're working through is so, so important. You may see implementation guides from other districts, but the real value for a team is going to be to go through the hard work together. Make it building specific, make it the work of your team so that you can go in the direction that you need to go to. And what we learned from this process is, it doesn't matter if it's literacy or it's math or PBIS or SEL, this process can be used. The value is going through the process yourself. Don't shortchange yourself by skipping ahead in the process.
Another thing I think is being very aware of the fact that you are collecting data that you can use, and be intentional about how you first target the needs, because you could assume that teachers understand it, but collecting that data and using that to pinpoint, and instead of just me doing model lessons, we actually had teachers do model lessons, and we made time for them to come in and observe each other. Sometimes it was a recorded lesson, sometimes we did a coffee talk in the morning before school, because learning labs with substitutes presented a challenge. So we found ways to work around that and make sure that the data that we collected was used to target the need.
In the clips that I shared with you from Teresa McDougall and from Arita Grote, you saw examples of teachers working together to identify sources of real-time classroom-generated data to help monitor student growth in real time and use that data to inform instruction. In the clips you just saw from the Newaygo school, you saw a conversation about using data to help teachers watch themselves grow in their ability to apply the different features and gold standard behaviors of evidence-based literacy practices. And in addition to those examples, we would also expect to see examples of gathering data to monitor the implementation of the other adult behaviors that support those changes in the classroom, the kinds of behaviors that the principal will use to support that change, the behaviors that the literacy coach will use, and the behaviors of others to support that work, so that we truly achieve that collective ownership. The implementation monitoring plan is all about creating alignment of behaviors for all key adults in the school in order to achieve collective ownership of the learning and growth process required to achieve sustainable change. We monitor for success, not judgment. We monitor to learn as we make evidence-based change. And we monitor to achieve equity and success for all of our students. The implementation monitoring plan uses and continues to build all 4 of the HILL principles to develop sustainable motivation and capacity for positive change. And as we build the positive core, the collective ownership, the evidence-based decisions, and organizational learning practices, they become automatic in the way we do the business of adaptive change. And they take deep hold in the school processes. And they replace processes that don't produce the results we're looking for. The implementation monitoring plan uses and builds all 4 of those HILL principles to develop sustainable motivation for and capacity for change through gold standard behaviors for students, for teachers, for principals, and for others in the school environment who share the responsibility for implementation. We monitor also to learn how teachers are working together to make integrity adaptations that sustain the important evidence-based practices over time. And finally, we monitor to watch the school grow its collective ownership for adaptive change. Implementation monitoring plans move a school through short cycles of adaptive change. As illustrated here, the HILL process is about successive cycles of change that deliver measurable growth in real time. As each growth target is achieved, the school grows its capacity to achieve its vision for student success and equity. Thank you, and enjoy the time to plan for your implementation monitoring and for achieving your vision of student equity and success.